Everybody to the show, and happy Easter. My name is Kirk Barbera, and we are going to talk about the reincarnation myths of Jesus, as well as a little bit about Easter. And I'm going to actually talk about some Greek myths, Demeter and Persephone, and a little bit about Dionysus, or Bacchus, as he's also known. The poem that I'm going to talk to you about today and read to you, and I hope that you read along, you can Google it. It's called Sailing to Byzantium by William Butler Yeats. Now, one of the things that I want to accomplish in this podcast and in this video is a couple of things in the thing that I've been working on for a while in the last several weeks for this podcast is the idea of getting secular humanistic values from the stranglehold that religion has held on those concepts. You know, like, it's very difficult for us to separate the idea of exaltation, reverence, faith, even, glory, awe, A-W-E, awe, without some sense of the, religious connotations that go along with it. Exaltation being like being on your knees to something higher power or a supernatural realm. So the mission that I've tried to go on is a mission of humanists, and it's more one of discovery. So I don't know that I have all the answers, or I should say, I know that I don't have all the answers, or that I know everything about this, but I do know, a couple things about poetry. Not a lot, but a little bit. And so I wanted to express and kind of go through and grapple with this poem, Sailing to Byzantium, for reasons that I hope will be obvious. Now, in talking about the myths of Jesus and Easter and Christianity, and then, these other myths, and then the poem, I wanted to start by explaining something that will, one, be an apology for the nature and the quality of my ability to convey this to you live. And I think what also underlies this whole message of reincarnation in a secular sense. A lot of this, by the way, I wanted to point out, comes from a book by Jordan Peterson. It's kind of, I don't know if you can see it. There you go. Called 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson, An Antidote to Chaos. And we're going to talk a little bit about chaos. I have the symbol of the phoenix up here you might be able to see. And one of the reasons this is so important is, and what it conveys here, is that our lives constantly go in chaos. So let me just give you a little bit of context about this live show that I'm doing that, a few people may or may not watch. And then I turn it into a podcast, or I'm going to turn it into a podcast that you can subscribe to. You can go to SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, whatever, and subscribe to, just search Poems for People Who Hate Poetry. Pretty simple to remember, I hope. Not as simple as just like poetry haters. Anyway, so I've tried different iterations, different views, different attempts at podcasts. I've always had, for my personal shows, a small little group of people who would listen on the regular and give me a couple comments, and that's always nice. But one of the things that the reincarnation myth can teach us, and I'll just start with this kind of conclusion, is the idea of reverencing or having faith that if you strive for something that can kill you, metaphorically, that can destroy the old self of you to some degree, to shed off your old skin, to rise, to die like the phoenix, is that you can then rise as a stronger creature. Now, for the Christians, I'll point out, of course, the whole point of having faith in the rising of Christ, which is what Easter, by the way, is all about, or is supposed to be about in the Christian sense. The whole point of that is that you have faith in this person, that they did rise, that they rose, this human being was, or man God, died, was killed on the cross by the Romans, and then he rose 3 days, I believe it's 3 days later. And so if you have faith that that happened, I mean, we're thousands of years later, you can have nothing but faith. You have no evidence that happened, but you can have faith that it did happen. And if you can have the faith, if you can believe without evidence that that happened, then you are believing in the reincarnation of God, and you're, in a sense, feeling you're feeling that you have something, a connection to the immortality of your own soul, in a sense. So anyway, I wanted to kind of make that clear because I think that it is going to be relevant. Okay, so with this particular podcast and episode here, I am trying something radically new for me. Now, I've done Facebook Lives and I've done podcasts on poetry, but this particular medium, whether anybody watches or not, is very different for me in that you can't see it, but I have a whole bunch of notebooks and I have actual books around and was trying to prepare. And what I normally do when I do these longer form Poems for People Who Hate Poetry podcasts is I have all my notes. I take, hours of reading and prepping of some sort, just jotting out ideas, I usually use, reams of these page notebooks here, these yellow page line notebooks. But what tends to happen is I will record the audio and I'll just hold the mic, I'll just hold it recording on the audio stream. And then I'll basically stop it as I get stuck, which happens a lot in these long forms, especially if I get backtrack and I'll even delete things along the way. So normally what I do is I'm kind of stop, I've planned everything and then I, record, but as I'm recording, I'm stopping so that I don't have the pressure of keep going forward. So this is the first time that I'm going to be doing multiple things simultaneously. So what does this have to do with reincarnation? Well, it's a scary thing. It's very scary to do that when you've never done it before. By the way, I'm going to be also sharing this. So you might see me, I'm reading down, so you might see me look down. I'm looking at my phone so I can share it. I'm doing all of this on my own. But the point I'm trying to make here is that what you want to be doing is what I'm trying to do here is stretch myself in a way that I know I'm going to somewhat fail at, and then I'll be better at it. Now we call this, failure comes out of success. You can't fail without success. There's a lot of that terminology, but I'm trying to remember my purpose here is to figure out what are the secular meanings to these deep moralistic concepts like reverence and exaltation and glory and things, glory, hallelujah. Like, I like those. That's another thing. Is like, anyway, I like those concepts, and I don't like that they only refer to something supernatural, something outside of the natural order of things, something that transcends, as they put it, as the Christians and other religions put it. I think that what transcends is our human ability to stretch ourselves, to shed, metaphorically, our skin and become a better person. It's, I think, why people cry at weddings, because we know that the single person, that person who is single, in dating, they were filed on their taxes as single. They're no longer single. They're not Ken single person or Kim the single woman. They are now Ken and Kim married couple. And they're two different people than they were just the day before. And the religious or the holiday or the celebration of that is the wedding, which doesn't have to have supernatural views. Again, it could just be psychological, which goes back to what Peterson is doing in his whole project of making the biblical series. So he has a series on his podcast that you can get for free called the psychological significance of the biblical stories. It's phenomenally interesting, to me anyway. So the whole point we're getting to is, what is the reincarnation myth in humanistic, natural our world turns. Well, I'm relating it to the idea of you have to fail before you succeed, which is, a cliche we hear all the time, but it's not convincing to a lot of us, right? Like, what does it mean to fail? Like, how do you fail? Like, I don't want to fail. Like, that does, people hear that all the time, and yet they don't do it. That's because they need stories. That's the whole point. And they need poetry, which is what we're going to be, reading today and going through some poetry today. We're going to go through Byzantium I'm pulling up more stuff to make it even less complicated. Woo! We're going to be going to Sailing to Byzantium by William Butler Yeats to kind of explore this idea of reincarnation, of going through the process of failing and then succeeding. So it's not convincing what all these business people are doing to say, hey, let's fail so that we can succeed. It sounds cute, and that's a great adage if you want to put it on your wall or whatever and make yourself feel better about all the fuck-ups you've had. But it's not, excuse the language, but it's not very convincing or helpful or inspiring, or, it doesn't have the same sense of follow God. Like, that has a powerful sense, and we know it's powerful because for thousands of years, men and women have followed God very, very profoundly. So there's something that we're missing when we simply hang on a wall a motivational speech or talk or a couple words that says failure the only failure is to stop trying, blah, blah, blah. Great. That's cute. Love you. How cute are you? But let's do something a little bit deeper. Let's talk about the actions, the myths, the people who actually did that on the deepest, most archetypical, profound level. So what, I'm, in a sense, what I'm about to say is kind of aggrandizing myself more than I deserve. But I think that we should all do this. We should all see ourselves walking in the footsteps of mythology. The mythology, the metaphorical, not the supernatural real of Jesus and the resurrection, is an interesting myth. Just like Adam and Eve is an interesting myth that we should learn from. You don't have to agree with it all, but you should know it before you criticize it. And which is one of Peterson's goals. And then there's other myths. There's Indian myths, there's Native American myths, there's the best of all myths, Greek. And I definitely stand by that they are vastly superior to any other mythology from a logical like they are just so focused on facts. Anyway, the facts as they know it in ancient times. So what does that have to do with me and what I'm doing on this live show? Literally this thing right here that I'm attempting. Well, the point I was making is that I, am nervous about this kind of show. Am not even nervous if anybody shows up. I'm nervous in the sense that, can I keep a stream going while I have multiple things going on? I don't have, like something like poetry. I've read this poem many times, but I don't have like the spiel that I can give on this. So I'm going to be reading some from a poetry book that I like to kind of help spur it on. I'm going to be talking a little, line by line about it. I'm going to go through it. So this is not going to be a 10-minute broadcast, I don't think. Although we might get shut off, and then I'll have to just keep going on the podcast because I'm the software also is new. So there's a lot of like things I'm not familiar with, or I'm testing the grounds. And when you're testing the grounds, it's very likely you're going to fall on your face. And so I'm falling on my face live. I'm falling on my face, and this you'll be able to see this live later, and then I'll also publish the podcast so you can listen later. And my hope is that I will reincarnate, into a better Kirk, and my better Kirk will be better, just a teeny bit better able to do live, and I will be able to, I will know that I can do more live videos. So when I was in film school, one of my teachers, where I did not like this teacher in so many ways, but one of the things that he taught me that I really, really loved actually was if you want to be a screenwriter, and I was taking a feature-length screenwriting class. The number one thing you need to do is to write your first feature-length screenwriting, feature-length script, period. So it doesn't matter how shitty it is, his words. It doesn't matter if it was phenomenal, it's Academy Award level. None of that matters. All that matters is that you write it from beginning to end, because what that teaches you is that you are a person capable of writing a feature-length script. That's the most important thing. Once you go through the fire and hell and agony of actually doing the feature-length script or writing a novel. So I did both. I was doing both because for the same reason I wanted to tell myself that I could write a novel. That's what I wanted to know. It's like, not just theoretically could I, but that now Kirk is a person who I could put on my resume, wrote a novel. Now, did I publish it? No. Did I sell it? No. Did anybody read it? Like one person. Like, no. So, but the point is that I know for me that I am a person who, has read novel. Has read novel. Yes, I have read a novel. But I am a person who has written novel. I am a person who has written feature-length screenplay. I don't think either of them are that great, but I did it. So my point is, one of the things we can learn from the mythology of Christ's resurrection, that he went through the turmoil and the fire, he was the man who chose to do that, is that we can choose to do that. That's one of the underlying truths that you can get out of that myth, that reincarnation, that resurrection myth. So that I think is a very important message that we can get. Okay, so one of the things that we see in this, in this mythology that I want to get across is that there is not how do we put this? That Christ is not the only mythology here. So, one of the problems of believing only in Christianity and not really interpreting it or reading other things, or one of the problems in just chucking out Christian mythology, is that you miss these truths that are there that may not be as clearly expressed in other places, although they are. But, is that you can be missing certain things that other cultures are adding or other ways of interpreting this same truth. So the truth of, excuse me, again, a live problem, I can't delete that. The truth of the Christ mythology is, the overall story is that he was the Son of God. He was placed on earth. He had to come to terms with that he was the Son of God. He goes out in the forest or whatever, and he gets his disciples. He tells his fishermen, like, come walk with me, and the fisherman comes to walk with him. And then he gets these disciples. They walk around, Jerusalem and the Middle East or whatever, and kind of spreading the gospel, go to Rome or the outlying empires of Rome and so forth. And they spread the gospel. But people are not liking it. People are not liking that he's talking to himself about a Messiah, that he's literally the son of a god. So, the problem is in this story, for instance, that Roman times when he's doing this is a little bit more modern. We're not talking, 10,000 BC. We're talking, after Christ. We're talking AD, after death. So we're talking about after the Greeks, the Greek Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. We're talking about after the great playwrights, Euripides, Aeschylus, and we're Sophocles. And we're talking about after Homer. We're talking about all this stuff. So the Roman Empire it's at its epoch. It's a big empire. It controls the entire world. This is after Julius Caesar. This is after Augustus. So it's almost, akin to if this were to happen today, like it's, if some guy were to be walking around and saying, hey, I'm the Son of God. And we'd all be like, well, you're fucking crazy, dude. Okay, like here's the mental institute. But, that they didn't have mental institutes. They just said, stop saying that. And then when he didn't stop saying that, they said, they basically threatened to kill him. And one of the things was that Christ gets betrayed by one of his disciples, not by some stranger that says, oh, there's Christ, go get him, go get him. I hate that son of a God. Instead, he's betrayed by someone in his inner circle. And it's something he knew was going to happen. So the mythology, again, is that all along he knows his fate. He's going to be betrayed by someone who loves him or he loves. And then, which is a devastating thing. And then the result is that he is going to have to bear his cross. Now, he's not bearing, one of the things about this story is that he's not bearing it for himself. He's bearing it for others. He's bearing it because someone else did it in the story. Someone else betrayed him. And he's doing it because the world needs him to, because that's what God sent him there for. This is all very, very critical to the mythology of reincarnation in the Christian view. Okay, so we have this Christian view. He goes to the cross, and on the cross he famously said, forgive them, Lord. Forgive them, Father. They know not what they do. And the idea is that he is doing this, and he's talking to the Romans, I believe, mostly in this time, but also the person who betrayed him, and also humanity as such. So all of us. But in the myth, this guy, Jesus, took on this burden. There's even a saying today, it's your cross to bear. So if you accidentally knock up a girl, well, and you didn't want to marry her, you didn't want to have a kid, well, that child is now your cross to bear, right? You have to, now hopefully you don't look at it as a burden, but the fact of the matter is that it's something you didn't want. Now you have to deal with it. You have to take on the responsibility of caring for that child. Now, the reincarnation myth of Jesus and what we're trying to accomplish here is he is saying, or in the myth of Christianity, he has taken on this burden and then he's killed, spear through the side by the Romans. Now he has faith that he is the Son of God. And then 3 days later, he resurrects and he surprises everybody. Surprise, here I am. Not to be, too irreverent. So he has that sense of reverence. He comes back to life. Oh, and Sean Doherty asks, what's your cross to bear, Kirk? Well, thank you for the comment, Sean. I don't know if you were able to see the beginning of this, but this is part of my cross to bear, is what I'm doing right now, is I am trying to, in the mythology of Christ, or the mythology of Christianity, I'm trying to do something more than I'm capable of doing. So I'm spinning it in a positive way. I'm not saying I'm betrayed by people and my life sucks and oh my gosh. Instead, I'm saying, hey, this is the best that I can do on this earth. I'm trying and I'm probably failing, but the next time I'm going to try and maybe I'll get a little better at it, and then I'll keep trying. And the burden is the process of failure and going through toward the next side. So thanks for the question, Sean. I think it's a great one. We all have different crosses to bear, by the way, because that's just my career cross. You could have like a relationship cross. I have many relationship crosses. You can have a cross with your family. You can have a cross with bearing your cross with the community. So there's a lot of ways you can interpret bearing your cross. But right now my cross to bear is trying to get through this live video and actually accomplish one of the damn things that I want to accomplish. And, hopefully one person, so I got Sean, so thank you. I got one person to listen. So that's awesome. Maybe next week I can get 2. Okay. So in the story, he resurrects, he comes back, and now he is Christ. He is the Son of God. It's confirmed. And then for all of the rest of Christianity, the point is that if you believe in Christ, you also will share in his immortality. You are basically playing out the actions that Christ did, and he believed that he was the Son of God. So you are believed that you are, immortal. That's essentially what it is. I know Christians are going to disagree with me. Fair enough. But that's what I understand to be the basics. So there's a couple elements that I gather out of that. One of the key elements is that he is doing it for other people. Okay, so that's great. Versus him doing it for himself. So let's talk about the stories of Demeter and Dionysus, or Bacchus. These are myths that preceded the Christ myth, that were the same exact thing. You know, they died for a certain period of time, or some form of death happened. And then in the case of Dionysus or Bacchus, and he's called both in both Rome and in Greece. One of the things you get in that myth is that Dionysus is killed, or he's torn apart by the Titans, the gods that preceded the main gods of Greeks and Rome. But then he's resurrected every season. So it's a very seasonal thing. In fact, Bacchus is the god of the vine. And if you've ever seen the pruning of the vines, they are brutal to it. So one of the ways that mythology comes to fruition, to excuse my pun, is that that the Greeks, or the ancients in general, not just the Greeks, but just the peoples of that time, are attempting to say, hey, why does this natural phenomenon occur? So they anthropomorphize it. And they say, okay, so every season we have we have seasons that go away. They have no scientific means of understanding this. They have no natural means really fully to understand this, because they're very primitive. And so they come up with stories to tell about it, right? So why do we have winter? Why can't we just have a 24/7, 365 season that comes along? Well, one of the stories they told was of Demeter and the rape of Persephone. Persephone, or Proserpine, is Demeter, who is the goddess of the wheat, goddess of the wheat and corn, essentially. And by the way, just as a pointer, if you look, one of the first things that makes a civilized society is the putting together of animals, domesticating of animals to some degree, and the raising of crops. So the second you start to do that, you become civilized. Before that, you're not civilized. Or at least you're less civilized, right? You're a nomadic tribe just roaming around. But one of the ways to understand civilization is that you have some sense of permanence in this one area, and you're saying that this is where I'm going to stand. So now you have to defend that land. Now you have to build walls. Now you have to gather together. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen once you do that. So it's a big part of progress to start growing crops. Now, Demeter is the goddess of this. And one point on the gods that may be helpful here is that in ancient times, the gods of the past were, like the Greek gods particularly, most of the gods were not very helpful or relevant in the lives of the Greeks, right? Like Zeus and Hera. Zeus was the god of lightning. Hera was his jealous wife. All they did was, Zeus would just sleep with all the beautiful women and impregnate them and fall madly in love with them. And Hera would turn them into cows and get them killed, and all these bad things would happen to them. So it's basically, in Ares did the same thing. All Ares, the god of war, would do was come to earth and cause us to fight wars and die miserably, is what the Iliad is about. So it's, most of the gods were not helpful on a day-to-day basis. But the two great gods of earth, Demeter and Dionysus, were incredibly important to us as humans, to the ancients as humans, because it was the thing you put into your mouth to sustain your life on a daily basis. So you pray and you hope and you work to sacrifice for Demeter, because Demeter is the goddess of wheat and food. In the same way that you would for wine, which is, we think of wine only probably in the in the drunken sense, but it's not just drinking. It's also, it gives you courage. It helps you loosen up, and it's refreshing. They drank wine with their food. It was part of the two joys of life is the food and the wine. So these are the two great gods of earth, and they are relevant to real people. So these ancients took this seriously, and they took it so seriously. I want to point this out. This is an interesting fact, that one of the biggest mysteries of the cults, the ancient cults, was called the Eleusinian mysteries. And this is like basically the acting out of growing crops, is for what we understand, but also the metaphorical acting out of our own lives and how we do this for our lives. And it's called the Eleusinian mysteries. And we still don't know a lot about what happened in the temple. We know a lot about what happened surrounding it. We know about the revelry. We know about the joyous occasion. We know about the orgies. We know about all this stuff. I have a quote here, if I can find it, by Cicero. He talked about it very interestingly. I don't know if I'll be able to. Yes, here it is. He said, on the Eleusinian mysteries, nothing is higher than these mysteries. They have sweetened our characters and softened our customs. They have made us pass from the conditions of savages to true humanity. They have not only shown us the way to live joyfully, but they have taught us how to die with a better hope. So the question is, what happens in these Eleusinian mysteries? We don't really know. Why don't we know? Because they took it so seriously, and there is an oath you had to take in the temple that you weren't supposed to talk about what happened in the mysteries. That's why it's a mystery. And so we still don't have that much information about what occurred in the mysteries, so to speak. Well, think about that. Like, if I were invited into a cult and then told, you would have to imagine somebody would speak about it. That somebody would escape the cult and go around telling everybody, oh my God, you can't believe it. They sacrifice a virgin in there. That's nuts. Like, we have no idea. I mean, we're pretty sure they didn't sacrifice anybody at this point. But the point is that we don't really know that much. We know a couple little details about what they probably did. That's insane. That means that the people that followed these Eleusinian mysteries took it bloody seriously. They would not break that oath for anything. So they took it seriously. So this is the Eleusinian myths. These are important Eleusinian mysteries, and these are the mysteries of Demeter. So in the story of Demeter, remember, she's relevant to your life, not the Zeus, although you do pray to Zeus because you don't want to get struck by lightning, but Eleusinian or Demeter and Proserpine or Persephone myth. So essentially what happens is, after the gods fight the Titans, I believe they actually, in some myths, in some stories, they fight the giants. So there's lots of fights amongst the gods. And the fighting is so brutal, so terrific, so gargantuan that it shakes Hades itself, the underworld. And Hades is the brother of Zeus, the great gods. There's three of the great Olympian gods. There's Zeus, Poseidon, the god of water, and then there's Hades, the god of the underworld. And in these three myths, or in these three gods, Hades becomes nervous that, hey, the underworld is going to see the light of day, and I don't want that. That's not who Hades is. I don't want no lights from the other top world coming into the underworld. People might escape, and the dead might roam the earth, and then everything will be thrown out of order in such a horrific way that we'll never be able to recover it. It was bad. So what he does is he goes around and he basically checks the perimeter of Hades. Right now, he's a magical god; he can do this. So he checks the perimeter of Hades. Along the way, Venus, the goddess of love, and her son Cupid see him, and Venus says, "Hey, Cupid, hit him with your arrow." That god, one of the great gods, has not fallen in love. He is not in my purview, and I don't like it when gods or humans aren't in my purview. So go out and make love. By the way, that's the worshiping of Venus, is to know you need to fall in love and you need to have sex. So she said he did not do that. So Cupid, again, nothing can escape the goddess of love. Cupid puts his sharpest arrow, gets it, swings it, shoots it right at Hades. the god of the underworld, the most powerful god, and he hits it. And right then, there's this beautiful young woman, this maiden, this young, beautiful maiden, playing with some hyacinthus flowers, because she's a young lady and she loves flowers. She wants to pick some. She has escaped from her little band of sisters, so she has no one watching her. And Hades sees her. Now, unlike what other men should do, what you should do is go talk to her and be pleasant. Instead, Hades goes as the god, the powerful god that he is, and he grabs her and he takes her down into the underworld. And he makes her his wife. Now, you know what happens when a woman is made a wife, of course. That's why it's called the rape of Persephone. Then Demeter goes around and to the band of sisters and asks, "Where's my daughter?" And they're like, "We don't know. It looked like she was taken." So Demeter is this is the god of crops, the goddess of grain and corn. She is depressed. And when a goddess like that is depressed, all the earth becomes like a barren wasteland. Just imagine Mars. There's nothing. Everything dies. There's no crops. It's getting terrible. There's a famine. And then, there's a lot of journeys I won't go into of Demeter. She meets some normal humans, but Zeus and the Olympian gods realize that this is getting terrible. All the creation that they've done of creating humans, Prometheus sacrificing himself to give the gift of the gods, all of that is about to be destroyed because Demeter is depressed, because the humans aren't going to be able to eat without the crop coming up. One element I missed was that before Persephone was killed or raped, she wasn't killed, raped. Before that, all of Earth was just a paradise, right? This is very common. And there was no seasons. It was just beautiful crops 24/7, 365, all the time. Okay, so we have to have that context. So now there's dead, nothing. So Zeus finally goes to his brother and says, "We have to stop this. You have to let Persephone go so she can go to her husband, to her mother." And so Hades doesn't want to fight Zeus, so he says, "Okay, fine." And he gives Persephone a pomegranate seed. And he says, "Nourish yourself on this." And there's different versions of this, but nourish yourself on this seed and go back to your mother. Now, what he doesn't tell her is that because she took a fruit of Hades, she must return. So Persephone goes to Demeter. They reunite. It's beautiful. They're happy. And then Persephone tells Demeter that she unwittingly or unknowingly took a seed of Hades. And, you could take the analogy or the metaphor of seed. What does a seed do, right? He gave her his seed. And now I must return to Hades. And so she works out a deal, though, Demeter and Hades and Zeus, they all work out a deal that Persephone will go down to Hades for 1/4 of the year, winter, and then come back for the rest, spring, summer, fall. So this is the deal they make. And so during winter, Persephone goes down. Demeter is depressed and sad and lonely, and so all things are barren. And then Persephone comes back, and they're all back to normal. Now, one of the things, so this is the myth of Demeter and Persephone in essence. Now, here's the thing. That does not mean that Demeter was ever worshipped as a goddess of reincarnation. Although there is an element of that, but it's Demeter and Persephone particularly is more the goddess of death. That's what she becomes known as because she's the queen of the underworld. So she becomes known as that. But I wanted to give you some contrasting stories here so you can understand the importance of this. And then I'm going to make a really big reveal, and then we're going to get into the poem. Okay, or at least we'll try to. I'm going to share this to a couple things while we're 1 second. Okay, and let's see what we can do. Okay, so pardon me for 1 second while I share this. Probably should have done that earlier. Oh well. Okay, so I shared it to a couple groups just in case. But the next god that I talked about, so there's the goddess of Persephone, or the princess goddess, right? And then there's the goddess Demeter, the mother. Now there's Dionysus and or Bacchus. Now there's a lot of stories to him, but it's really important to understand a couple of aspects. All you need to really understand about him is that he's the only god, the latest god. He's the god that comes after, and it helps to understand this one fact about the Greeks in particular, is that they were very fact oriented. So they always they were not afraid of running away from facts. So they didn't want to, like one easy criticism of Christianity is that you can't have a God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. You can't, and then call it a unity and call it one. Like you can't have that. It's a contradiction. And it's the same thing with the Greeks. The Greeks had this idea that, well, we're going to worship Dionysus or Bacchus, the god of wine. And wine can be revelric. It can enhance our courage. It can make us speak things we would not normally be capable of speaking because we're too nervous or not, we don't have the courage to do so. But there's another side to it, is it can cause us to murder, to beat, to be brutal, to shout, to scream. So there's two sides to this. So the Greeks were very fact-oriented. They saw both sides and they would not. So they told stories about both sides. They didn't just, whitewash one side. They never did that. They always tried to focus on the facts, and they told stories according to the facts as they could see it. Versus, most religions will whitewash everything except the one little thing that they want you to believe in. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about this myth. I don't want, all you really need to know, I think, that I want to actually make clear, and I'm going to read a little section here, is that the god of wine, okay, here it is. So with Demeter and Persephone, there is the Eleusinian mysteries, which were practiced every 5 years, and were telling you how to, reincarnate, like how to live a better life, how to grow yourself into the next stage of life. It taught you how to live, as the great orator Cicero of Rome wrote, that I read earlier. Now, Dionysus is, to some degree, an even more important god in a cultural sense, to some degree, and at least in a historical context. And because what, Demeter helped you live with joy and to die with hope, because she's about those two things, the nourishing of the body and then death. Dionysus is different. Dionysus is a god that went around spreading the worship of wine, but sometimes he would also incur people and inspire them to go become brutal. Like he had these women that would follow him, and they would become so brutal and savage that they would tear apart men, even sometimes their own sons, because they were so brutal. And that is a whole nother issue. But there's the two sides of this. But guess what? The religious ceremony was to worship Dionysus. Well, here we go. The place where people, so here's what was done at the Great Festival was open to all the world, and is a living influence today. The festival of Dionysus. No other festival in Greece could compare with it. It took place in the spring so every spring, when the vine begins to put forth its branches. And it lasted for 5 days. So it happened around this time of year. They were days of perfect peace and enjoyment. All the ordinary business of life stopped. No one could be put in prison, because this was a big deal, this praying celebration to Dionysus. The prisoners were even released so that they could share in the general rejoicing. But the place where people gathered to do honor to the god was not a wild wilderness like the Eleusinian myth or mysteries, made horrible by savage deeds and a bloody feast. It was not even a temple precinct like that's actually more like the Eleusinian mysteries. So Dionysus was not celebrated in a temple with ordered sacrifices and priestly ceremonies. It was a theater, and the ceremony was the performance of a play. So the greatest poetry in Greece and among the greatest in the world was written for Dionysus. The poets who wrote the plays, the actors and singers who took part in them were all regarded as servants of the god. The performances were sacred. The spectators, too, along with the writers and the performers, were engaged in an act of worship. Dionysus himself was supposed to be present. His priests had the seat of honor. And so this is tragedy and comedy would be put there, but tragedy was more important to them. So he was a suffering god, Dionysus, because he went through a lot of suffering. He was torn to pieces in some of the stories by either Titans or sometimes by Hera, the wife of Zeus. So, and again, if you remember why I talked about Demeter and the natural causes of, they're trying to explain the why the seasons are cyclical in the way that they are, and they tell the story of, the rape of Persephone. Well, in the case of why, what happens to this vine, we're shearing it. So they told stories about like him getting torn apart because you shear the vine brutally to a wine vine. If you ever see, like, they just shear it all off. And so they imagine that Dionysus, the god of the vine, was torn to pieces, just like his vine. So he's a god that suffered, but it was his joyful resurrection, like the resurrection of Christ, that they celebrated. Although, well, we'll talk about this in a second. And they celebrated it in his theater. But the idea of terrible deeds done to him and done by men under his influence was too closely associated with him ever to be forgotten. He was more than the suffering god. He was the tragic god. There was none other. So, in his resurrection, Dionysus was the embodiment of the life that is stronger than death. And that's why he became the center of belief in immortality. I'll end with this. It's a great little line from Plutarch, who wrote a letter to his wife after their young child, their daughter died. And he said, "About that which you have heard, dear heart, and the soul once departed from the body vanishes and feels nothing. I know that you give no belief to such assertions because of those sacred and faithful promises given in the mysteries of Bacchus, which we who are of that religious brotherhood know. We hold it firmly for an undoubted truth that our soul is incorruptible and immortal. We are to think of the dead that they pass into a better place and a happier condition. Let us behave ourselves accordingly, outwardly ordering our lives, while within all should be pure, wiser, incorruptible." So Dionysus is not only the god of resurrection, but the god of the theater, the arts. And that will lead us into this next part, because the whole point of why I'm doing this whole series, Sunday Morning Poetry, why I'm interested in this concept, is this idea that resurrection or reincarnation is not a supernatural phenomenon. So Plutarch, of course, and the ancients and the Christians and all people throughout all of history, have believed that that reincarnation, that resurrection, literally you get your head cut off, like your heart stops. I have to make this so clear because apparently Christians just don't get it. And like that, literally your heart is torn out of your body, it's stomped on the ground, you're dead, they bury you in the ground, and then somehow you're still alive in the afterlife. So I don't believe in that, and atheists don't believe in that, or they shouldn't, because if you believe in that, then you don't believe in, you believe in some kind of theology, whether you realize it or not. But what is relevant, guys, what is critical, is the idea of reincarnating, coming back to life in your own living 80, 90 years on this earth. So marriage is an example. Getting a promotion is an example. Quitting your job and trying something radically new, like starting a podcast or a show. That is an example of reincarnation. Reading a book, reading poetry that we're about to read, that is an example of reincarnation. So I'm butchering this line. I believe it's in Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, and I believe he got that from Plutarch, but I can't remember the line. Actually, I'm going to see if I can look this up. The coward dies many deaths. Let's see. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The brave experience death only once. Of all the strange things I've ever heard, it seems most strange to me that men fear death, given that death, which it can't be avoided, will come whenever it wants. So this is in Julius Caesar when I believe he's talking to his wife. Oh man, I don't remember her name. But anyway, he's talking to his wife who had predictions of his death, and he's getting all these augurs, these predictions that he's going to die. And he says, cowards die many times before their deaths. The brave experience death only once. And this, I think, is relevant to what we're talking about here is don't be a coward. That the story of Jesus and resurrection, the story of Dionysus getting torn apart, the story of Demeter, the story of Adonis. There's so many stories about, every story to some degree, like every action story is facing the turmoil and the chaos and the hell that is before you and emerging and dying because you're going to fail. That's why in every story there's like this arc. In every good story, there's an arc that has to happen where the hero of the story, if it's Jean-Claude Van Damme in the 90s, right, he's got to get his ass beat. He's got to get beat, and then he's got to rise up. That's the only way it can happen. Otherwise, it's not interesting. If all Jean-Claude Van Damme or The Rock did, is you got in a fight with them and they beat you. And they beat everyone around them like Superman, who just like juggling planets, and then it becomes boring. No one's interested in it. So he has to be beaten down and lose. And then he can rise up and he's strong. You can hear the action music, and he's getting ready. He goes, "What's cuts everybody in half. And, he's like a Superman after, but he's got to fail first. He's got to fail first. In The Godfather, this is done, in art, this is done very beautifully and better art. In The Godfather, this happens when Michael Corleone gets his jaw broken. So, he makes a lot of mistakes. He doesn't do what he's supposed to do. He doesn't take care of his family. He's not part of the story. He's not part of the family yet. And that's what The Godfather is all about. And then it's been a while since I've seen that movie. Now I'm forgetting part like the sequence, but I think, he now wants to get involved because his father got shot, the Godfather. And so Michael Corleone gets cracked in the jaw at some point and it breaks his jaw. Well, that's the striking of the hero and the falling of the hero, because after that, he's a new man. And after that, he's part of the family. After that, he's going to kill whoever gets in his way. After that, he's going to do what's necessary to propagate and to keep the family alive. He's the father now. Right after he gets broken jaw. So you've got to get that crack in the jaw in there somewhere. And this is true of all stories, but it's also true of your life. Stories have truth for life, for my life. That's what this podcast that I'm doing right now is all about. Reincarnation is I'm trying to be better myself. I'm trying to get to the next level. And one thing I can learn and get better at is being more concise, maybe, when I talk. Okay, so that is the story of Dionysus. And I brought up poetry in the Dionysian theater, the festival every spring to Dionysus, which everyone would get together. They released all the prisoners and they watched theater. They watched poetry. Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, Aeschylus. They watched poetry, and the purpose of that is what we're going to talk about next in the poem "Sailing to Byzantium" by William Butler Yeats. So a couple of preface things I wanted to bring up. Make sure I got everything. There's a lot to talk about with Christianity and Jesus that I didn't bring up. But let's go into the poem before this turns into a 47,000 million year endeavor. So a couple of things I think is important to understand here. So kind of preface what's going on here. So one, I really recommend that you get this poem. If you're reading with me or if you're listening is great. And I'll do my best to go slow and to kind of enunciate the right parts of this. But you may want to read for yourself to some degree because it helps to see it sometime. So a couple of little things here. I wanted to talk about the theme of this show today. And the theme is art as religion. And that's what I was bringing up Dionysus for. The festival of Dionysus is that it is a religion to contemplate art. A religion to contemplate, to think about, to experience art. Period. If you're going to church, great. Go to church. You know, you can listen to Sunday morning poetry later and then experience art. Because Bible is just one story. Now, why do we want to experience art? What do we get out of that? Well, a couple things. This poem, Sailing to Byzantium by Yeats, is often interpreted as Yeats's theory of life after death. Like, one thing about that is everyone, I don't think, and a lot of the poetry books that I've read and the interpretations of this poem that I've read don't necessarily agree that that's really the case. And I can see their point. I don't think this is a story or a poem about reincarnation after death, although it's relevant, of course. And what do I mean by that? As I've been saying about the natural part of reincarnation after death is there's no such thing. You don't die and come back. That's unnatural. That's called being a zombie or a ghost, or Casper. You're not a zombie when you after you die. You're not a ghost. No. What you are is dead, but you only die once, or you die thousands or hundreds of thousands of times during your life. Most people don't. Most people won't live and die over and over again because, as Shakespeare or Julius Caesar implied, they are afraid of the one death they're going to have, so they don't die many times before that. Right, which is what I'm doing. I died before. I'm in the process of death right now. In the Phoenix myth symbol, I'm in the fire part. I've crossed. Oh, by the way, Easter. The reason Easter eggs, if you've ever wondered, part of it is because eggs have always been a symbol of fertility. Easter is not a Christian religion, although they hijacked it like they hijacked Christmas. It's a purely pagan myth or purely pagan celebration. Christians took it over and made it really somber and sad. And it's supposed to be like a celebration like Christmas is, where they're celebrating it's a kind of a reincarnation myth in Easter as well, but it's celebrating the equinox, like the equal length of day and night. Anyway, long story short, Easter eggs have always been, for time immemorial, representing fertility. Or not Easter eggs, but eggs represent fertility and fecundity, and same thing with rabbits and hares. Like we talk about the hare as, like breeding like rabbits, right? Well, there's a reason we have that saying. It goes back millions or tens of thousands of years. Rabbits breed a lot. They're very fertile. And so that's something that ancient pagans worshipped. And so, part of what you have to do is, this is a time of sex and joy and having, and repopulating the earth during this time. And, people are fertile and they're spreading their seed. And part of the story of Easter is that, basically the fertility. And again, it's pagan, not Christian. It has nothing to do, reincarnation was just something it just happened to, the reincarnation of Christ happened to be around that time. So they took over the pagan because they became more powerful politically. Okay. So Yeats could not know about life after death. Nobody can know about life after death, no matter what they say. You can have faith in it. You can have opinions about life after death. You can believe in life after death, but you can't know life after death. So this poem, Sailing to Byzantium, can't be about literally life after death because you can't know it. No matter, I don't care who, even religious people have to admit you can't know it. You have to have faith. You can't have knowledge. You have to have faith. That's the whole point of faith. But what he can know, what he does know intimately, and Yeats is in his 60s at this point, he knew all about the process of reincarnation that takes place in this world, the reincarnation of life into art. Now that is reincarnation. So let's go into this a little bit. One of the analogies of life into art that you can think of is, as Yeats says, finally in art, the soul attains the condition of fire. Time comes to an end, and the soul puts on a rhythmic or luminous body and contemplates all the events of its memories in an eternal possession of itself in one single moment. Where this is the spiritual state where all fuel has become fire. The spiritual state, the conscious state where all fuel, that's the world of art. The world of art is where all fuel has become fire. So think about that for a second. We tend in our culture not think about analogies or in any sense anymore. We just hear the words and then don't stop and think about them. But that's the point of this podcast and this show. Where all fuel has become fire. Well, what is fuel? I mean, think about if you're trying to start a bonfire, right? And you put some kerosene on it. Well, what good is that? You're cold and you just have a smelly bunch of wood. So if it's become fire, if you light the fire, then the fire is now something that is worthwhile to you. And the point of that is in art, all fuel has become fire. That's another way of saying that what the ought in life, that things could be this way. That I could, if you have a statue of a beautiful man, or a beautiful woman, you could say, I could be like that. I could strive to be like that. I'm not like that. Some fuel or potential, but I could be like that. That's the promise of art, is art shows you or should show you what life could and ought to be. It's the potential. It's showing you the potential. Now, in art, let me give you an example of this. Actually, if you Google, and I don't know how to do this on BeLive.tv yet, but if you Google David's Socrates painting, just the Death of Socrates by Louis David. I don't pronounce his name, Louis David. If you Google that, what's really interesting about it is and I've seen this. Or a big version of this. I don't know if it was the original, but a big version of this at a museum, and it's beautiful. I mean, it is a beautiful painting. It's very realistic. It's more than realistic. And one of the things that people have pointed out and even made fun of today is that Socrates has a six-pack. He's lean. He's muscle. I mean, look at his shoulder muscle. He's got like dang, Socrates got a sexy shoulder muscle. Like, how the hell does this old wizened, and he's always been shown and thought of and written about as like the ugliest of men. But yet here he is as like, he looks like a 25-year-old dude, except for his big beard and kind of balding head. What the heck's going on there? Does David not know what he's talking about or doing? Well, obviously this great painter knows what he's doing. Art is the spiritual state or the conscious state where all fuel has become flame. It's what ought to be. And it's the place, where you can contemplate not just the real Socrates, but the pure and the best Socrates, the beautiful Socrates, the Socrates as he was in an ought to be kind of way. I know that's kind of weird to say. So that's what art is. And this is why, the Greeks celebrated Dionysus, the god of wine, and the god of resurrection, because again, as I've been saying, part of art is also a reincarnation, which we're going to get into. That is represented by fire. You got to go through the fire. They even have a lot of sayings about this in life. You got to, forge your character in fire, young man. And you have to go out and fight the good fight, and then you'll be in the fire. Okay. So where all fuel has become flame, where there is nothing but the state itself. That's the Socrates, the perfect state of Socrates, not as he was, but as he ought to be. Nothing to constrain it or end it. And then he adds, we attain it always in the creation or enjoyment of a work of art. So this is important. I want to type this in so we can see this. Pardon me for 1 second. Okay. So that is a critical component, is the idea that we attain it always in the creation or enjoyment of a work of art. We attain the spiritual state that's on the screen right now, if you're watching, where all fuel has become flame. We attain that state always in the creation, in the creation or enjoyment of a work of art. Dionysus, the theater, poetry, literature, novels, great movies, all these things, great symphonies and compositions, great architecture, great sculpture. So how do we attain the state, the spiritual conscious state where all fuel has become flame? Well, we attain it always in the creation or enjoyment of a work of art. Clear? Okay, probably not, but it does. But it passes, and then that passes away from us. One thing I wanted to point out as well is this little concept about, before we get into Byzantium, it's the idea of yin and yang, order and chaos, which is one that Peterson talks a lot about. And by the way, I'll be doing rule 3 pretty soon here. I thought it was going to be the shortest one, and it's turning out to be the longest one, as all of them are. They're very intriguing to me to do. I enjoy them a lot, but they are very complicated. I have business to run and things of that nature. So civilization in general has been the process of imposing order on chaos, the effort to control force into form, to achieve a patterned society of diverse units working harmoniously together. That's part of what we're trying to do in politics. So one of the things the ancient Greeks tried to do is figure out, what is the perfect polis? What is the perfect size of a society that you can work harmoniously together? And Aristotle actually posited that 10,000 was the number. You can't go too much more than 10,000. And there's some argument that it's interesting to think about how he phrased it. I think he's wrong, but there's a reason why I think he's wrong, and politics is another issue. But, like the contrast was the chaos of the Persian Empire, which was all chaos and disorder, except that they had this one integrating factor, which was fear of the god king. That's what brought it all together. Okay, so let's keep going. But man never achieves this harmony more than partially in political, economic, or social relationships, and rarely in personal life. His religions and philosophies, too, decay and change. Think about Christianity. Christianity itself has changed. We've even had in America, 2 great awakenings, and we may possibly be in another great awakening, right? In art alone, he sees the symbol of harmony in its perfection, and that he can contemplate it, though he may not be able to explain it. In art, he may be able to contemplate this perfect harmony, even if unable to contemplate it. And this is how we progress. You cannot order society and get to the next level. So right now, as always, we're in a state of chaos. And I think we're in a greater state of chaos than we otherwise would have been. One of the reasons we're in this greater state of chaos than we otherwise would have been is because we destroyed art in the West. We no longer have art. We don't have art in literature, not art in the grand sense that we had in the 19th century even, or in 800 BCE with Homer. We lost something critical. We have remnants, like it's shattered into a million pieces. We have remnants of it. We have remnants of it in movies. We have remnants of it in literature. We have remnants. We have no remnants of it in painting. I see no great paintings that are modern. I don't see it. If you have some, please send them my way. We destroyed it to some degree in music. Like we don't have the harmonies that we used to have in the music. So the integrating of numerous complex factors. It's not gone. It's been shattered, I think. And, part of what we need to do in the future is to integrate art into something great and to not that you have to always create it, but that you need to propagate it and push it forward to the best of your ability. Okay. So now maybe after all that, we might be ready for the poem. Oh, no, not quite yet. Just one more thing we got to go into. After I talked about all of that, the important thing we need to realize and understand here is the idea that, hey, what we're going to do here, when we go to sailing to Byzantium. So Byzantium to Yeats was the height of all civilization. It was the apex. And its art, Byzantinian art, was the flower of that culture. So why do you want to sail there? Because it's the flower of that culture. It's the ideal in reality and in art. I don't agree that, I don't know enough about Byzantium art to say that that's right or wrong, actually. So I shouldn't say I disagree. Also, there's the famous first lines in the poem, Sailing to Byzantium. That is no country for old men, which is where the movie No Country for Old Men got its line from. No Country for Old Men from Yeats. And you can watch that that movie and get a kind of a sense for what is meant by the reincarnation, the dead, the old into the dead, but also the idea of not wanting to grow old. And they play on that pretty well. It's an interesting, won an Academy Award for a reason. That is art. I think they do some good art there. It's not the greatest in the world, but it's good. I liked it. I don't know that an artist should ever even try to go for the greatest in the world. They should try to go for what they know and do what they can. And I think the Coen brothers do a phenomenal job. I have a couple books on here of their scripts and how they do it because I have studied that. I think that they are ones to emulate and try to achieve what they've achieved because they have they harmonize a world that is worth contemplating, even if it's mostly in the gutter. It's they're very interested in the gutter and like what men will do to achieve some kind of gold. That's usually what they do. Is not that he is a hero to achieve it, but that he's usually this disgusting creature that murders, rapes, does anything necessary. He doesn't care. He'll go out and do evil. And that's what they're interested in exploring, which I'm not a big fan of. That gutter research. But anyway, I do think as art, it's interesting to watch. So to Yeats, Byzantium represents a condition where physical age is of no consequence. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we see the poem. The work of art is apart from the world of physical change and decay as a part of the world. Let me rephrase that. It is change and decay and corruptibility, but it's not. The work of art is immortal. The work of art doesn't grow old and die. This is a theme that poets have been talking about for thousands of years. Homer, I don't remember the line, but he mentions in the Iliad that Achilles, needed a Homer to become immortal. So to fulfill the fate of Achilles, which is, remember, if you know anything about the Iliad, Achilles goes to war because of a prophecy that if he chose to fight the Trojan War, he would die, but his name would live forever. If he chose not to fight, he would live a great happy life, but after a couple generations, his name would fade and nobody would remember the name of Achilles. Well, think about what that says to the person, Homer, who makes his journey or his that who fulfills that prophecy. Homer fulfilled the prophecy, not Achilles, because Homer fulfilled it by writing it down. This is part of the process of reincarnation that he wrote down, and every new generation reads that story, and it's reincarnated in the soul of that story through the sense medium of words is reincarnated in the mind of Kirk in 2018. I hold the story of the Iliad in the same way that Achilles lived it. That's the reincarnation of poetry and literature and theater, which is why they celebrated it in Greece. Okay. Those of you who have listened this long, thank you very much. We're going to now read the poem after an hour or so. But I hope you enjoyed that setup a little bit. I think it's relevant and helpful to kind of getting a sense for what we're, this poem, because this poem is pretty complicated. I'm stretching myself because this is the moment when I'm really stretching myself, because not only am I going to read it live, which I always do numerous readings and recordings to get what I think is the best one. So I'm going to do this live, and if I mess up, I'm just going to redo the sentence. And then I'm going to try and actually talk a little bit about it with some of the notes and books that I have to the best of my ability. And I'm probably going to continue to fall on my face. But thank you for watching me fall. And you are more than happy to laugh and say, good luck next time, son. So we're going to be talking about the sailing to Byzantium, which is and you pay attention to the condition of fire. There's a couple words that happens. This is the phoenix that I have on the screen here. And this is what happens when you die, is you go through the flame, the fire, you're forging your character. And when you sail, the poem is called Sailing to Byzantium, but I'm going to phrase it at the beginning that his first line, so he titled it Sailing to Byzantium. That's the name of the title. But the first line of the poem is, that is no country for old men. So what is that? Byzantium. Well, the way it's phrased, that is no country, it sounds like he is actually leaving Byzantium at the beginning of the poem. So keep that in mind, is he is leaving Byzantium at the beginning of the poem. And I'm going to try to add this little thing here so you can see it. Hopefully. There we go. Got it. So you can, if you can see that on the screen, if you happen to be watching it. Again, I'm doing this live, so I'm trying my best to do multiple things by myself. So thank you for your patience. And anyway, that is a important part of the poem, is to understand at the beginning he is actually sailing away from Byzantium, and then we're gonna, then the question is, why is he sailing to it? And keep in mind this condition of fire, which is part of reincarnation, which is physical, natural, like what I'm doing right now, trying to get through this live. And, it's also relevant in your career and your love life. You get married, you're conditioning yourself through fire. You're forging ahead, you're putting the ring on there, and you have flames around you, all that good stuff. Fashion a new body in the symbolic fire of inspiration, illumination, and purification. So fire, so keep this in mind. Fire is the central symbol in this poem. Okay, so I'm going to read, so bear with me. The poem is not long, it's 4 stanzas, but it is a little bit complicated. It's not an easy poem, which is what makes me nervous. So please stick around and listen, read it if you can, and let's kind of understand, and then we'll converse with verse afterwards. That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations, at their song, The salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas. Fish, flesh, or fowl, commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born, and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. O sages, standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, burn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal. It knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make, of hammered gold and gold enameling, to keep a drowsy emperor awake. Or set upon a golden bough to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past, or passing, or to come. Okay. So, boom. Hiding that. No more reading. So that is the poem. Now, let's go into a little discussion of it. We're in a mental climate here. We're getting a mental climate right at the beginning. And, that's what I was talking about with that is the country he sailed from. And it's important to understand that Byzantium, although it was a real place, he in the 1800s chose this poem, maybe even 1900s, chose this poem or this Byzantium because it's gone. It's dead. The civilization of Byzantium is now gone. So what remains? And we'll talk about what remains. But Byzantium is not a place on the map. I mean, you could call it, what it is today, but it's not a place on the map today. So it's an emotional thing that we can contemplate what it is. And what is Byzantium? Well, to him, it's the country of youth and mortal joys, spontaneous animal fertility. Remember, we talked about Easter eggs, but that's not a realm of the old. So he believes, right? An 80-year-old man is not fertile in the way that he technically is, but 80-year-old woman is definitely not. And but an 80-year-old man, in the same way of the virility of a 20-year-old man, is not living in the same kind of experiential world by necessity of his body decaying. Now, what we're getting, and this is how to read poetry when he's talking about great poetry. This is a country. He doesn't come out and say, "Oh, this is a country of this place that's not on the map. This is a country that is of the sensual joys." What he says is the young in one another's arms. Right? It's not a country for old men because it's still young in one another's arms. It's if it was an old man and a young woman, you'd probably assume it's grandfather and daughter, not lovers, or grandfather and granddaughter, not lovers, right? If you saw two beautiful 20-year-old man and woman together, you'd assume lovers. Those dying generations, that's critical. And if you read how he wrote that, he put M dashes on either side to really emphasize those dying generations. Because when you make love, it's a kind of a death. You never will have that experience back. You experience it. It's an explosion of physical sensuality, and then it's gone. And that particular, you can have sex again, But that particular experience is gone forever. It's the nature of experiences and the nature of senses is that what happened, yesterday when you had sex, that yesterday's sexual experience is gone. And yeah, you should have more sex, but that nevertheless, there will be a time, for instance, when you're middle-aged people having sex, no longer the young having sex. By definition, you could be beautiful middle-aged, but you're still middle-aged, or you're 90 and you're at the, you have maybe a couple of years to live of life, and you maybe you can figure out how to have sex then too. And I know they do. So that's that type of thing is possible. But those dying generations of you, not out there, this is you dying. You are going to die. You are never forever going to have sex as a 20-year-old. Forever. Only for 1 year, for 12 months, you get to have sex as a 20-year-old. Now we're talking about sex, because it's more clear, but it's really love and all, it's the kissing, it's the courting. And you're not going to court as a 20-year-old forever, only once. You're also not going to court this person forever, only once. You're also never going to have a first kiss ever again with this person. You also never, which is why people leave each other so often. And you're also not going to have sex with another person or this person once for the first time again, which is always its own unique experience. Like it's a very unique experience to have sex for the first time, of course. Okay, birds in the trees, those dying generations, at their song. So this is the song of the youth and sex and sensuality and love and holding hands and kissing and singing songs to each other. The salmon falls. The mackerel crowded seas. So he's talking about, salmon coming out of the falls type thing. So it's a very sensual, concrete world. You have to visualize this. Mackerels are, they're a predatory fish, but they're very tasty. They're very part of if you're a fisherman, it's an important food to have for those kind of societies. Mackerel crowded. So it's full of life. Think of a pond that you might have that's just littered with fish, just everywhere. Just millions or thousands of fish in this little place, and everywhere you look, there's just fish. That is the feeling of life everywhere. I lost my place. Okay, fish, flesh, or fowl. So again, this is water, earth, air. The country of the creatures of water, earth, air. Water, fish, earth, flesh, air, fowl. So we're talking about Byzantium as a culture of sensual pleasures for the young in earth and water, earth, air, and all of the major elements that we can have. Fish, flesh. I mean, that's a beautiful way of saying, it's alliteration, it's well done, and it gets across earth, water, air, and the sensuality. I mean, this is what poetry does. Is that's a whole new way of viewing the world. That the realms of the earth is not earth, water, air. Like the Captain Planet, and we don't have fire in here, but we're going to get to the fire. The fire's important. Captain Planet, he is our hero, going to take pollution down to zero, and whatever about the pollution stuff. But you remember they had earth, water, air, fire, right? They had all four elements. Well, instead of that, we're getting fish, flesh, fowl, which sounds beautiful. Fish, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl. Commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born, and dies. So, it's kind of these types of elements are going to be contrasted with the condition of fire. So we have these physical images that we're going to need to think about later. In this first 6 lines, we're in a lovely world, a lovely summer world of youth and sex and natural abundance. But there's something, remember the first line though. This is what's important about such a wonderful poem. That is no country for old men. That's how he started it. And it's called Sailing to Byzantium. So there's a lot going on here. Okay. But in the midst of all this movement, we are brought up short in the last 2 lines where the sound pattern hardens into the final heavily accented monuments of unaging intellect. So it says, caught, these are the last 2 lines of this stanza. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect monuments of unaging intellect. Something is even occurring to me now for the first time that even though I've read this many times, that's occurring to me, and it's part of the joy of doing this kind of teaching. So we have this abundant life all around us of the sensory world. But we tend to neglect in that because we're caught in the sensual music of, the rhythm of bodies and having sex or dancing on the dance floor. And that whole, if you're talking to a woman or a woman's talking to a man and you're at a bar or you're at a gathering, and there's something when you first meet somebody, and, dating gurus talk about this a lot. And yes, I've read dating gurus. And one of the things they talk about is what you want to achieve is vibing with one another. You want to vibe. And what that means is, and we've all vibed with people before. Man, I need to fix the light in this sucker. It is bright. My face is like Casper the Ghost. So, there's a vibe that you get with one another. And the vibe is like you don't have to think, you're kind of playing off of the other, each one to the other. And that's the sensual music, is that you're at a bar, you kind of sweat, bodies are in tune to each other. She moves and you kind of respond without thinking. She looks at you in a certain way and you're quiet as you look back into her eyes for a few minutes, and you're talking in a certain manner and you're saying stories, and then she responds with the story in kind, and then you tell a joke and she laughs, and it's a kind of a rhythm and a vibe and a natural sensual music. But sometimes, caught in that sensual music, all neglect. So we neglect monuments of unaging intellect. Monuments are objects made by men to commemorate the dead and their values. So he's saying that in that sensual love rhythm, vibing with somebody or just enjoying the sensuous world that we live in, moment to moment, we have a tendency to neglect the monuments of unaging intellect. The intellect that never ages, the intellect that is forever. Homer writing the Iliad, when you're in that moment, vibing with each other, and you're talking about a time when you went diving into the Pacific and how the rush of air, and if you know anything about talking, in a first moment, you're meeting somebody, especially guys, especially women, it's very helpful to have very colorful language and tell beautiful stories. This is a powerful, seductive technique. But the point is that when you're in that rhythm, you're not thinking about Homer, more than likely. You're not thinking about Homer. You're not thinking about Jesus, probably. You're not thinking about the unaging intellect, the Shakespeare, the Dostoevsky, the Ayn Rand, the great thinkers, creators of art, the Louis David. You're not thinking about Socrates, drinking the hemlock and his beautiful abs and why he's like that. You're not contemplating beautiful art. You're not contemplating a beautiful work of a statue of Venus or Aphrodite. You're not contemplating that because you're experiencing it right now live, and all the flaws, the smells and the tastes and the good and the bad and all the things that go along with that. It's the real, and you're neglecting the monuments of unaging intellect. So these solid permanent objects outlast individual life, though. So there is something important to these monuments of unaging intellect. Now, what is the basis of these monuments? And what he's saying is it's the immortal element in man. So while we're having this dance, someone may be painting that unbeknownst to us, or have painted that dance, and they have immortalized the dance of us making love. Or by making love, I mean the old term of making love, which was to court, basically, not only the physical part of it, or the sexual consummation of the making of love. So, the basis of these monuments is the immortal element in man, his mind and spirit, which is not recreated into natural physical offspring, but is recreated into inanimate objects not subject to natural laws, art. So that whole process of monuments of unaging intellect is contrasted with dying generations, which is we're dying every time we make love in the sense that I just said. But what isn't dying is a statue of that moment forever. that lasts beyond our death. We get shot in the head at 90 because we're too old and our society has become that kind of society. But the monument of us at 20 years old having, someone sculpted that for us and put it up in a museum and, put it there forever as a monument of unaging intellect, because it's the process of recreating a reality according to the artist's metaphysical value judgments. That is art. That's art. Now, and I mentioned this earlier, but monuments of unaging intellect is Homer's Iliad. The soul of that story, which he picked up, of course, because he lived hundreds of years after the actual story. He was getting stories, but he wrote it down in something monumental. And that monumental thing was the Iliad, which got passed down for thousands of years. This got passed down because it was so important. It was such a big monumental monument of unaging intellect. That's what the Iliad is. And the soul of that story. When he took papyrus, he took his little feather quill thing that they had back then, whatever they had, and sketched into papyrus. That's the physical thing that he created. But that's the soul, or that's the body that he created. But the soul that lives within that body of the papyrus that Homer himself wrote in 800 BCE lives on today up on my shelf. It's not the same thing. I mean, obviously Homer didn't write those specific words. A printing press did that. But the soul of it was passed down for thousands of years because it's what is embodied in that material. The monument of unaging intellect. And the soul is a good soul is constantly finding a new body. That's the reincarnation myth. That's the Dionysus myth. That's the Christ myth of resurrection that a secular person can get behind. You can be a humanist and respect the Christ mythology of resurrection. Not that it will be you physically, your head gets cut off because you got ran over by a truck. And so your soul is going to, wisp off into space and you're going to live forever in a paradise. No, your head gets cut off. You as a physical entity is dead. You're gone. It's over. Goodbye. But the eternal monument of unaging intellect can be there. And even in your life, in the 90 years, 100 years you hopefully have here on earth, you have the ability to contemplate this monument of unaging intellect, and therefore die and be resurrected, reincarnated in the contemplation of art. That's Dionysian theater. That's the whole point of that theater, of why they worshipped Dionysus, the god of wine, where you revel. You have wine and it gives you courage and voice that you normally wouldn't have. And, that has two sides of it. You're brutal or joyous. And that you had these works of art that as you watch these men on stage die and become reborn, Oedipus goes through a tragic missing of sin. You die too, and you are reborn too. That's the whole point of art, of contemplating art. Okay, so now that's the first stanza. So the poet points the difference. The poet points out the differences here. In contrast to the dignity and grandeur of the monuments, is the spectre of how paltry a thing an old man's body is. So this is the next stanza, and the next stanza is an aged man is but a paltry thing, and that is, in contrast to the dying generations and the monuments of unaging intellect. What is an aged man? A paltry thing. A tattered coat upon a stick. God, what a beautiful way of, I know we don't want to think of ourselves as becoming this tattered thing, tattered coat upon a stick. What is a tattered coat upon a stick? It's a scarecrow. That's what old age is. That's his analogy for old age. Old age is like being a scarecrow because your body is decaying. You're basically just a tattered coat upon a stick. You just kind of barely making it around because the meat, the sinew, the muscle, the virility has evaporated and is slowly evaporating. That's what Yeats is saying. Well, you can disagree with him, but that's what he's saying. Okay. Now it's quickly followed by the picture of the soul as an animate body clapping its hands and singing as loudly as the birds. But it has to learn its new song. It has to learn this. It has to study the different order of being, the monuments of its own magnificence, the arts man's spirits has begotten and which don't die. Okay, so an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick. Unless soul clap its hand and sing, and clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing school, but studying monuments of its own magnificence. This is that you are human, so you are of the race that created the Iliad, that created the Oresteia by Aeschylus, that created the Antigone by Sophocles, that created Othello by Shakespeare, that created Moby Dick by Melville. I was going to say Hawthorne. That created the Marble Faun by Hawthorne. That created these great works of art. That created Godfather. You have the same stuff. That's you. It's not literally you, but you have that some kind of fire that is capable of doing that is within your whole soul to some degree. You just have to learn how to study it. Poetry, poems people hate poetry, and the Dionysian mysteries or the Dionysian theater to enact it. And therefore I have sailed the seas and come to the holy city of Byzantium. Okay, so he comes to the holy city, which doesn't carry a religious significance. It's hallowed, existing in the illuminating and purifying fire, which he'll get to, which is away from the creatures of earth, air, water. So it's significant in his poem that he doesn't say all the four major elements: earth, air, water, fire. I mean, that's how ancients always consumed or believed all the four elements were earth, air, water, fire. Well, he only talks about earth, air, water, fish, flesh, fowl. So where's fire? Well, now he's going to talk about fire. The sages to whom the poet prays have been old men too. So again, the death of Socrates. Socrates was an old dude. He was going to die soon anyway. His body did not look like old guys. Like, okay, there are old guys who can look like that, especially today with, nutrition. But Socrates was always conceived as very ugly. But in the Death of Socrates painting, he's this beautiful young body, right? I mean, even his freaking calves are just phenomenal. His kneecap is like, geez, my kneecap looks like it's got a whole mound of fat around it compared to his. Like, this is amazing, right? He's got his shoulder muscles. And then his face is still good looking, but it's not too good looking. It's not like a beautiful young person, but he's got that big beard and he's got some not the greatest features, but his body is definitely really nice. I mean, as an observer that is not gay. So, okay. So he praises to the poets. So Socrates is an old man too, but now Socrates is merely a source of inspiration. And he stands as in the gold mosaic of a wall. And in fact, he has to visualize, the poet has to visualize them in a work of art. You have to. This is why it's so important to study poetry, to study literature, to study art. As no matter what you do, if you're a friggin' plumber, great. You're a person who contemplates art and practices plumbing. You're a doctor, great. You're a doctor who contemplates art / is a surgeon. Practices the craft of surgery. The career is your craft. Every human needs to contemplate poetry. That is a fact. If you want to live a good life. And then he prays, this is a weird one. So he's got this line in here. Let me read the next stanza. O sages, this is the sages, like Socrates is an old man. He's praying to this sage. When you see, oh sages, that's a prayer. Like, in the Iliad, it starts, "Oh, sing to me, oh muses, sing to me the wrath of Achilles." He's saying, "Oh muses, the ones who have inspiration, give me inspiration so that I can tell this story." That's what Homer is saying. "Oh muses, oh muses, standing in God's holy, oh sages, standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, Pern and Agyre." I want to talk about Pern and Agyre. That's one I had to look up. I think he might have like made this word up, but it does exist, but it's a weird word. Pern and Agyre. It's in another poem, Yeats talks about a pern is a dialect word meaning a bobbin on which thread is wound. So you put, thread and you wind up your thread, I guess. But he seems to be using it as a verb, come spiraling down. So, and then this gyre is what we get gyrate, the word gyrate from. It's like to spin around, to spin or dance, to gyrate your body. Is also a word deeply embedded in Yeats's imagination as the pattern of all dynamic activity. So he's using it more metaphorically or analogistically. He's using it as an analogy or a metaphor, right? That it's not just the gyrating of your body, it's also the dynamic activity. Or if you think about the yin-yang symbol, if the yin-yang symbol were in constant moving, you have that little dot in the center, which Peterson calls the consciousness in his biblical series. Like the dot is the consciousness, you have chaos as the black, white is the order, and you have this constant fluxing around of things. And that is the yin and yang symbol. So Yeats is talking to Pern and the Gyre is that's what he means by that. So the sages and their fire are to take possession of him and continue his heart away and consume his heart away, the carnal element in him. That's his heart is the carnal element that desires things like having sex with a young lady. His heart is sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. This is the pain of becoming old, is that he's saying that he still wants to sleep with the beautiful 20-year-old woman, but he's not able to because his soul is fastened to a dying animal. And that does seem like a pretty horrific experience, to want to have sex with the 20-year-old, to want to sleep with the beautiful creature, but that your soul is repugnant because your soul is attached to a dying animal, which would be repugnant for the young lady to have sex with because she wants to have sex with the flourishing virile young man. Okay. It is still regretting the world of the first stanza that he's doing here. So he's harking back to that first stanza of the those dying generations, looking to be young again and fulfill itself sexually. Yet it's also sick with desire to be rid of the dying animal and gathered into the artifice of eternity instead of caught in the sensual music. So sensual music where all neglect happens. Consume my heart away, this is the poem, sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. It knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. The artifice of eternity allows for several meanings. And we can call it the eternity of art. Artifice means artificial, but it doesn't have to mean in the negative sense of artificial that's, like man-made, like it's not good. Like if we think, oh, you're being artificial, we think that you're not being real or good or authentic. But there's the other art aspect of artificial, which is like artificial intelligence, right? And there's a lot of value to artificial intelligence. There's a lot of value to artifacts from the past that we dig up an artifact of the past. Like imagine if we dug up some of the plays of ancient Greece that we lost and saw, whoa, there was another great playwright that we didn't really even know about that died alongside. Maybe he was, 500 years before, not real. It's not realistic, but maybe we got some great work of art about my favorite person, Penthesilea, the Queen of Amazons. And we learned, because there's not a lot about her, and we learned a lot about her as a human. Or some great play that was written up that time that we missed, which we know we missed a lot. So artifice is also good. It's a man-made thing, not a product of nature, at least not a product of random nature. It's a product of organized nature, which is what man does. Man organizes. That's what we do. He may further imply that even in creative art, man cannot escape from time. The idea of eternity is itself is an artifice. For man can know only, my dog is snoring. For man can know only time. In creating or experiencing art, we feel we have abstracted ourselves. But the minutes tick away, nevertheless. So, we think of that golden bird singing on the bough. Like, that's why I have the phoenix. It's kind of the golden bird. And this is in the final stanza, out of nature, into the figure of the golden bird, singing on that golden bough. And he's read a description of this in a book of Byzantine art. So this comes from real life that Yeats read. The bird and its song are indivisible. The soul and the poem it makes both fashioned in the fire. Let me read the last stanza. Again, once out of nature, mackerel crowded seas, those dying generations, fish, flesh, or fowl. That's what he's talking about. Once out of nature, I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing. But such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make, of hammered gold and gold enameling, to keep a drowsy emperor awake. Or set upon a golden bough, to sing to lords and ladies of Byzantium of what is past or passing or to come. So, it could be that the drowsy emperor, for instance, is the dull human world that needs awakening in the fiery song. That's the mission of a poet, is to stab the consciousness of man awake. I want to stab you awake. I want you to stab you awake, because your consciousness is fully awake and on fire when you meet a beautiful woman that lights you on fire, or a man that lights you on fire. But most of our lives are not lived like that. It should be. More of your life could be lived in that state, in a heightened state of consciousness. That can only be accomplished fully by art and by literature specifically. Literature particularly stabs the consciousness awake. And so this drowsy emperor is you, it's me on our day-to-day basis when we're just kind of lounging around watching Netflix or something. Like, it's not you're a drowsy emperor sleeping. It's the dull human. Or it could also mean, it could be a song for all those who can escape to Byzantium. So remember, Byzantium represents the cultural art epoch of all of humanity. So you can go to that anytime. It's called buying a fucking book on poetry, buying a novel, buying The Fountainhead and reading it. Reading The Fountainhead is traveling to Byzantium. Reading The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand is sailing to Byzantium, the world of art. But the final paradox is that the immortal song can only be about time, of what is past or passing or to come. Though itself beyond time and change, it sings in its imperishable form to human beings and can sing only about the condition of being human. So in this poetry, we have, some of the concluding thoughts I wanted to wrap up with. I know for those of you who've lasted this long, I appreciate it. You can always comment, what you liked or didn't like, what I could do better next time. That's the point I was trying to make, is the purpose of this show today. I did it live, and I'm going to release it. You can, go to iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud and type in poems for people who hate poetry. And you can see the value of this. But I wanted to do this on Easter morning, and Easter morning is, for me, will be done in a few minutes. And I wanted to do this on Easter morning because Easter is about celebrating the resurrection of Christ to Christians. But, to the most normal person, it's actually about fertility, fecundity, the hiding of, fertility by the rabbit, by the hare that goes around and hides that fertility. And then the young children have to go find it because it's a part of Well, these young children are becoming fertile, like a young girl will one day become fertile and actually bear fruit. Right? That's what the symbolic meaning of Easter and hunting for those eggs comes from. It's a pagan ritual. That reincarnation, even if you're an atheist, you're a humanist, you believe only in the natural world of this right here that I'm touching with my shirt. This is sensual. It's not silk though, but it's sensual. You can touch it. That world is the world that we inhabit, but we can transcend it naturally in terms of contemplating art. And when we do that, like Dionysus, who was torn apart and then is reincarnated, and in the celebration of that reincarnation is the Dionysian theater. So here's my project to you, my call to action to you. What I want you to do next. I want you to contemplate sailing to Byzantium. I want you to contemplate the death of the fire, of burning in the fire of this old man who's going to die. But as he's dying, he's going to spread his unaging intellect in a monument. What is the monument? The monument is the poem Sailing to Byzantium. That's the beauty of art. And even if you don't write that kind of poetry, you can live and die in the contemplation of it. You will be a different person when you contemplate art. When you die, because you have new realization, you die metaphorically speaking, and then you rise again like the phoenix, stronger, better, ready, more able to face the challenges of the world. You will reemerge a phoenix rising from the ashes, better person, and capable of facing the suffering of the world. Thank you. I'll see you next time.